Good morning. My name is Mark Baldassare, and I'm the President and CEO of the Public Policy Institute of California. Thank you all for joining us today. PPIC is pleased to present this virtual program featuring Joseph Castro, Chancellor of the California State University. This event is part of PPIC's 2021 Speaker Series on California's future. As a public charity, PPIC does not take or support positions on any ballot measure or legislation, nor does it support, endorse, or oppose any political parties or candidates for public office. We'd like to thank the sponsors of this series for their underwriting support. These organizations are listed on your screen and on our website. This series is also funded by the PPIC Donor Circle and the PPIC Corporate Circle, individuals and organizations that provide generous support to PPIC. Please consider joining us as a sponsor or donor to make more programs like this possible. More information is available at ppic.org. If you have a question for Chancellor Castro, please send an email and include your name and organization to the email address on the screen, ppiceventquestions@gmail.com. We have time at the end of the program for these questions. Now I'd like to welcome our featured speaker, recently appointed as the 8th California State University Chancellor, Joseph Castro. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So you took on the new role for you in January, Chancellor of the California State University System. Tell us about what your priorities are in taking on this role at this challenging time.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I wanted to just begin by saying that I'm a big fan of PPIC. I still remember the day in 1994 when it was announced that the PPIC was being established, and I was assistant dean at the Goldman School of Public Policy at the time, Mark, and it was just like a thunderbolt there. Everybody was so excited, and you've done such great work over such a long period of time. So I just wanted to begin with that. And maybe I'm the first chancellor with public policy training, formal training as well. But I'm happy to speak with you today and about my priorities. It's really 5 priorities, Mark. First and foremost is I want to support each and every one of our 23 presidents in making sure that we repopulate our campuses in a safe manner this fall. And as you probably have heard, I announced that CSU plans to have a majority of its courses across the system this fall in person. There will be variations by local campus areas because of the conditions in each part of California, but that's my very highest priority to do that. And then secondly is to maintain our progress with Graduation Initiative 2025. And Chancellor Emeritus White made such tremendous progress with our whole CSU family over the last several years. And I want to meet those bold 2025 goals and then also accelerate the elimination of the equity gaps that exist, those between underrepresented students and other students, and Pell Grant students and other students. So that's really a priority for me. And I've set up a new steering committee that's going to really look at how we can eliminate those gaps that have continued to be very stubborn but need to be eliminated. Third is to inspire our leaders in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., and philanthropists all over the country to invest more in the CSU. We have such a powerful story. We transformed the lives of almost 500,000 students across California and beyond, the largest, most diverse, and I would say most consequential university in the country. And the return on investment is very high. So that's a very high priority, and we can talk more about that as you wish, because we did get some good news from the governor and the legislative leaders last week to restore the $299 million cut from this current year budget that we'll see in July. Very good news. in addition to other investments that the governor calls for in his January budget. Fourth would be to accelerate our progress in diversifying our faculty so that it better reflects the rich diversity of our talented students. And I have a lot of ideas to build off the important work that's been done throughout the CSU for many years. And then fifth and finally is to leverage technology in an even more strategic way to enhance teaching and learning across the CSU. So those are the five, Mark, and excited to get to work on those. And I've been busy for the last 2 months with the presidents on all those fronts and other fronts as well.
Thank you. Well, those are really very comprehensive set of priorities, and they will certainly, advance the California State University system over time. As I mentioned, you come in early January. We're in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis that we've never seen before. And you're called upon to lead an organization that, as you mentioned, has about 500,000 students, has about 25,000 faculty, has about 25,000 staff, has 23 campuses. Wow, that's a lot. People are having all kinds of challenges now. I'd like to hear from you about, before we talk about the priorities for the future, how are you dealing with the issues that are facing the students, the faculty, staff across these 23 campuses as we now are a year into the COVID crisis?
Thank you, Mark. It's a very important question. And I do feel the stress that our students and faculty and staff and their families and our entire state is feeling, and beyond that. But that I want everybody to know that. And one of the things that I've tried to do in my early days, and I'll continue to do that, is to listen carefully to all the different perspectives about issues and listen to where the pain points are, and to try to do everything I can to reduce stress. So at the January board meeting, for example, I announced that we would not increase tuition for this upcoming year. And I knew that was on the minds of students and their families. And I wanted to make sure they knew that we understood the challenges they're facing. And I wanted them to know that that was off the table, that they could plan in a way where they would know that there'd be no tuition increase. I also announced that I would not support a furlough if the governor's budget and the funding from Washington that we expect come through. And that is certainly occurring now since that announcement. And that really kind of lowered the stress of people that thought they might be affected by a furlough, or talented staff and faculty. And then finally, I announced that we would not lay off any of our faculty or staff due to budget cuts. And I felt like those three concrete statements needed to be made to lower the stress for everybody involved, and then try to figure out ways in which we could redouble our efforts around student mental health. So there's one bill that we're sponsoring in Sacramento this year that would try to address that, and to really listen to our faculty and how we could support them with administrative leave if they needed that for different reasons. So I think in this time where there's just so much stress, if I can, as chancellor with the presidents and other colleagues, try to lower that, I'm going to try to do that so that we can really focus in on our mission and values and do the work that everybody wants to do to support our talented students.
Yeah, thank you. I also know that you are an expert on leadership and expert on leadership of higher education, and I and a mentor to many. And I'm wondering, in your approach to taking on a new role, are you a believer in the first 100 days? Do you have a first 100 days set of goals like President Biden had? Within the first 100 days, we're going to get 100 million shots into, or however many shots into arms with the vaccine, something like that. Do you have some things that you have in mind?
Yeah, I consider myself a student of leadership and I try to practice it as well. Um, it's humbling, especially during a time like now where there's no rule book for leadership during a pandemic. So um, thankfully, I've had a lot of great mentors and I try to listen carefully. It's something my grandfather taught me, is to try to listen before I speak. And so that's been a very important skill. As it relates to the first 100 days, absolutely. These 5 priority areas are things that have been important from day one. I started talking about them during the transition. And to see our budget situation change so dramatically from September when I was appointed to February, it's not just luck. I think that our messaging with the governor and the legislature, our board has been so strong in its support, and our students, faculty, and staff are aligned. I think that's been very important, seeing that progress in Sacramento and in Washington, D.C. So I'm already seeing great progress there. And then we're making great progress on the repopulation efforts as well. Though, as you know, Mark, with these variants, it's hard to tell exactly what could happen next. But I'm cautiously optimistic that we can do that. So these 5 priorities that I laid out earlier are really part of my first 100 days and will go on for the next year plus.
Thank you. Thanks. You mentioned that one of your biggest priorities is reopening the campuses. And I would, for those in our audience, considering the size and the scope and the geographic distribution of the campuses of the California State University, what do you see as the biggest issues facing the system in reopening?
Well, I think we made a wise decision last May when we acted early to say that we were going to be virtual in the fall and in the spring. And I feel like we made a wise decision in December to announce early that we would be majority in person for the fall. I think that as I'm listening to all the different voices, by and large, people want to come back to campus. There are some important exceptions to that, and I understand it, and I think we need to respect that uncertainty. But by and large, people want to come back. They want to be safe again. They want to be vaccinated. And so what we've tried to do is make sure that we have vaccinations available to our campus communities, and about half of them have centers now or will have shortly. And we have a mass vaccination center at Cal State LA. I'm hopeful for some more throughout the CSU. So that is a big challenge. We need to get our communities vaccinated, not just in the CSU, but across the board. And I think that's going to lower a lot of the stress there as we get to the fall. And I just think we need to talk through the different issues that are going to come about. We're going to have to talk about appropriate social distancing and masking and so forth. And it's not going to be exactly clean as we probably want, because we're going to be learning different things along the way, and there could be some bumps along the road. But I believe that we just need to listen to each other and try to work through these issues, because I think by and large, people want to be back to the campus, and there'll be more hybrid courses, more online courses, and that's a good thing in my opinion. But it'll be without the stress, I hope. We can lower that stress and focus on innovation and support for our talented students.
You mentioned online courses, and we had online courses before, and we have a lot more online courses now than we did a year ago. And as an educator and as a leader of the system, what can you tell us about what we've learned about online courses, and their role in higher education?
I do think we've learned a lot. We were under 10% online before the pandemic, and then it just about flipped after the pandemic. And I think through the course of going through that pivot, we've learned a lot. We've invested heavily in professional development for our faculty. At Fresno State, we invested in a summer program, and they loved it so much they wanted us to do it again during the winter break. And I wouldn't have predicted that they would want more so quickly, but there does seem to be an appetite for more professional development, and I want to meet that. And then I know that so many of our faculty are trying to do this while raising their children who are not at schools and dealing with elderly parents, and our students are dealing with this as well. So what I hope is that we'll take the learning without that stress later, and it's going to lead to some very interesting new directions for CSU that are going to be better for everybody. So I'm trying to keep an open mind about that, but my job as chancellor is to support our presidents and to find those resources to support our students and faculty and staff as they make that transition. And I think we're going to be different in the workplace as well. That's going to look different, and we still need to navigate that carefully.
Yeah. So, and maybe we don't know yet what the new normal will look like, but as much as you can give us a sense of how you're envisioning what that new normal might look like for students, for faculty, for staff, what it means for commuting, for the communities around the Californians, and will it vary from campus to campus?
Yeah, I think it will vary from campus to campus, Mark. What we've seen so far is the pandemic has evolved differently within California, and vaccination distribution has been different within California. I live in Long Beach now, and I've watched Mayor Garcia and that team have so much success and a lot of celebration in doing that. And then, other parts of the state are not able to do that for whatever reason. And so there's that unevenness that occurs. And in the end, each of our presidents knows that we must consult with our county public health directors and with our faculty and staff and students. And I'm giving them as much latitude to do that as possible. So there will be some variation. But in the end, what I hope that we can do is maximize the opportunity for people to get vaccinated. And then that will help students and faculty and staff make the best decisions that they can for themselves. And for some of our students, Mark, again, using the San Joaquin Valley as an example, it was very hard for some of the students there to come an hour each day to Fresno. It might have been cost prohibitive for them. And we were investing in shuttle systems and so forth. Well, maybe they'll want to do more hybrid and come once or twice a week. And I think that's just fine if that's what they'd like to do. I'm interested in giving them more options. And that's where I think we can be more accessible over time and help our students to be more successful.
Yeah. You mentioned early on opening up vaccine distribution sites at the different campuses. And obviously you've been part of the Cal State system as a president, now chancellor, through this crisis. I would like to, for our audience, give people a sense of how you see the role of the CSU campuses during the crisis, and now at the stage where we're still in a crisis, but we're giving people vaccines.
Well, I've been able to see it from the beginning, and I remember some of those conversations with Chancellor Emeritus White and the other presidents about, well, what if the county wants us to do this or that? And we just decided after discussing it that we were going to open our campuses as much as possible to help with this particular challenge. I opened a lab in Fresno that was not being used, and the county needed a place to test.
For testing.
And so we gave them the space to use. They brought the equipment. It worked out really well. Just before I left there in December, we gave a piece of equipment that could store Moderna and Pfizer for one of the local hospitals because they needed more equipment to do that. And we had it sitting in a lab. And there are countless examples of the way that we've helped. You know, the LA example that was just open last week with a mass vaccination center. I really appreciate that the governor and the president of the United States decided to put it there. And we'd be excited to have them at any of the CSU campuses that they wish. And that will help the communities. That will help us to reopen faster as well.
So you were on the faculty in family and community medicine at UCSF. So I would not miss the opportunity this hour to ask you your view on where we are with the crisis today and where we are with the vaccine distribution and what else we need to do in California to get ahead of this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was one of the policy guys in that department, and I used to work really closely with the MDs, and we had these courses with the MD students, and I just loved the way that they would attack a given condition, look at all the different ways in which to approach it, and just incredible leaders that we developed there at UCSF. And so what I take away from that as it relates to this issue is just to be as creative as possible in how we distribute our vaccines. And to the extent the CSU has this infrastructure to support that, you know, the governor knows that we will do whatever we can to support his efforts to distribute. And I know each of the presidents is, willing to do whatever we can. So I would say let's use our assets, our UC and CSUs and community colleges to help in this effort. I would want to inspire everybody within the CSU to go and get vaccinated when those are available. And I know for some of our communities of color, there could be a hesitancy about that. And as a man of color, I certainly understand that. But I can say I've encouraged my mother and my sister and other relatives to do it, and I'm going to do it. And I think that it's the right thing to do right now. That's the safest thing to do. So I very much want to inspire our community to do that. And that will maximize our chances of being back to whatever this new normal will be in the fall and beyond.
Sounds like it's all about the vaccine distribution in the next few months.
I think so.
I wanted to, you mentioned the disproportionate impacts on communities of color. And I want to more broadly talk about the economic impacts of the pandemic in California, disproportionately falling on lower income households, communities of color, and women. Given occupation and industry, some people have been spared from very difficult circumstances economically, and others have suffered greatly. And how do you think about the role of the Cal State University system as we look to promote economic opportunity and find our way to an equitable and sustainable recovery?
Well, Mark, before the pandemic, we were known as probably the nation's greatest value in higher education, and in terms of social mobility, ranked, at the highest levels, most of our campuses. So that was before the pandemic. And what I would argue today is that the CSU is more important than ever before, and public higher education is more important than ever before. We know that people without college degrees really have suffered during this economic downturn. And that concerns me because a lot of those families have the students that would come to the CSU, and I know there's a lot of stress and strain on them. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to take tuition off the table so early, because I just want to have less stress on them. But we're at an inflection point, in my view, and And we can be that inflection point as the largest, most diverse, most consequential public university, that we could redouble our efforts to support talented students from all backgrounds and help them succeed. And that will bring their, as it did for me, it changed the entire trajectory of my family's life. And my sister is now a graduate, and my cousins, and that's how I've found that it works. And I think right now during the pandemic, this is the hope that we can provide for those very talented students from challenging backgrounds. And I totally get it, challenging where they live and what their parents are going through and what they're going through. And we can interrupt that and give them the opportunity for a better life for them and their family.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier, and it's a theme that's come back, that the California State University student population is one that reflects the state's racial and ethnic diversity. I've seen the statistics, and they certainly bear that out. At the same time, you want to create a more diverse and inclusive system. So I'd like to hear some of your thoughts as you think about topics like student admissions, faculty recruitment, and in this last year, in which there have been certainly major issues raised around police community relations, how you're thinking about campus policing.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in terms of inclusion, Mark, at each of the campuses where I've served, in 5 UC campuses and at Fresno State, I've always played a role in trying to advance the diversity efforts, the inclusion efforts of that campus. And at Fresno, the experience that I had there, I think, is really helping me as chancellor, because when I walked in the door, the student diversity was quite striking. And it increased over the 8 years that I was there. But when I compared that to, say, the diversity of members of my different volunteer foundation and other boards, very different. When I looked at the faculty, very different. The leadership of the campus is very different. And I spent my whole presidency working on that to make it more diverse and more inclusive of the entire community that we're serving. And that's the way I'm approaching this as chancellor, is to support our presidents and help them in a variety of ways, with policies, with inspiration, with funding, to try to do that across the board. And we have rich diversity in so many ways within the CSU. And then there are some areas where it's a little softer, and faculty for me is one of those areas of opportunity where I think we can do much better over time. And it will tie back to the success that we can achieve with the graduation initiative 2025. Because in my experience, when students are able to be taught by a faculty from backgrounds similar to theirs, that they do better. I've even seen this with my own 10-year-old son with his teacher this year. He's doing better than ever, even though it's a pandemic. He has the only male of color in his elementary school.
Okay.
And so I don't think that's a coincidence. And in my own personal experience, I've had mentors from all different backgrounds. However, I think it's very important for our students to see that and to know that their faculty understand them, just as they want their president or chancellor to understand them and to work to support their success. So that's definitely one of those areas I really want to focus on.
Mm-hmm. And
you wanted to talk about the police part too.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that this has been an issue on the Cal State campuses, but certainly in communities, across the country, questions about the relations and the police and trust in police, and how do you think about the role of campus policing? Safety being a very important factor, but then some people don't necessarily feel that the police create safety.
Yeah. Safety is, for me, the most important thing. And I feel like in general, our police have done that well. I don't hear a lot of concerns. but I've been listening to the voices of those who've asked for changes in this area. And President Drake and I just spoke the other day, and we decided to have our police chiefs have a conversation about all of these issues. And they've been having a conversation about it. We have as well. And I think there are some opportunities for us to learn from each other. You know, our police chiefs in the CSU embraced President Obama's 21st century policing recommendations. And I know that in general, they're viewed as being very progressive. And again, with my Fresno example, I remember our students appreciated having them there because at times during the day and night, you want to have support like that. So that's the approach I'm taking. But at the same time, I want to listen to those voices. And if there are concerns that we can address in a forthright way, I know the presidents and I want to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I do want to ask you a few questions about where Cal State system fits in with the broader education system in California, but maybe really start out by just getting your view of where we are today with education in California. So you graduated from Hanford High School.
Yes.
Got your BA at UC Berkeley, doctoral degree from Stanford University. So what's your view of how well the education system is working for children growing up in California today?
I think it continues to be uneven, Mark. And I loved my high school. We were the Bullpups, which are kind of like the lower division of the Bulldogs down the street. And I felt like I did receive a quality education, and I think I did. But when I stepped foot on the Berkeley campus, I remember my first English class, which was Rhetoric 1A, and I remember the syllabus being handed out and looking at it and saying, I've never heard of any of these books, to myself. But then I could hear a whole bunch of my classmates saying, oh, I've read this one, I've read this one. And that was a poignant moment for me, because I figured out right away that I needed to make up some ground. And I did. I made up the ground. But it's just an example. And I think that continues to be the case. Yeah. And so, the CSU plays an important role in this area through its preparation of talented and diverse educators and leaders in education. I want us to, continue aggressive efforts there and to try to work with Superintendent Thurman to help so there's less unevenness, so that students have the opportunity to get the coursework they need to be successful. And, as I mentioned earlier, I made up that ground, but it would have been a lot easier and better if I'd been ready to go on day one and not had to go through that stress and strain and extra effort there. So I do think that that's an issue, and I want us to work closely with K-12 to address the inequities that exist. And that will help us to serve our students better. It will help our students to graduate a little faster and accommodate more students. So it'll be a more efficient system as well. And there's an easy relationship right now between the UC and the CSU and the community colleges. Eloy and Michael and I work very closely together. We're talking on a regular basis, and I'm optimistic about what can happen because of that.
Are you optimistic about California having enough college graduates in the future?
Yeah, I think we're all focused on that. And I'm going to do my best as the leader of the CSU to help achieve those goals. And we'll need support from the governor and the legislature. And I think we can inspire that over time. I know he cares deeply about higher education, and he's been so generous already. So I want to build off that support.
So part of the issue around access depends on the transfer pathway, in particular the transfer pathway from community colleges to Cal State system. And I wondered if you could give us a sense of where we are today and where we need to be? You mentioned that you're working closely with the other system leaders, but yeah, where are we and where do we need to be?
Well, where we are now, Mark, is we've seen a very significant increase in transfer students to the CSU. And the ADT program, Associate Degree for Transfer program, has really helped to spur that along.
Do you want to explain it to our audience?
Yeah, you bet. Well, essentially, what it's done is it's created pathways for our students who go to community colleges to know that if they follow what the pathway specifies, they'll have the chance to get their degree from the community college and then successfully transfer to one of the CSUs that they're interested in. And so there's been a huge increase there, Mark. As you might know, about half of our students are community college transfer students. And I think that's a great thing. When they get to us, they tend to do very well and graduate high levels. I think 80% plus graduation rate. So I'm interested in strengthening that pathway. I think there are a few bumps statewide that we need to address, and Chancellor Oakley has given me a heads up on those things. And I think our faculty are communicating in positive ways about this, and we'll need to do more of that. But I'm optimistic that we can continue to strengthen those pathways. And as you might know, the governor invested about $10 million in some pilot work in the Central Valley, where we were looking at different ways of breaking down silos and accelerating progress so that a student, let's say from Fresno, could get their associate degree at the same time they graduate from high school.
Yeah.
They could then start at Fresno State with that associate degree and finish in 2 years. And he would have a whole group of very talented and diverse 20-year-olds with bachelor's degrees.
Yeah.
So that's something that, we've started in Fresno, and we can do even more of that, I think, statewide.
I was going to ask you about the dual admissions program and what do you see as a potential, and maybe you can explain that to our audience too.
Well, we're certainly still studying the governor's proposal, and the idea, as far as I can tell, is to make sure that students throughout California have an opportunity to get their degrees from the community college and the CSU or UC as quickly as possible, and as quickly and as affordable as possible. So what that will mean practically is to try to figure out how we can structure that in a way so that that can come true. And I'm thinking we're going to start with some pilots and try to scale those up from there.
Do you see any potential downsides to something that's got this structure, or is it too early to tell?
I think for me, it's too early to tell. I mean, as a policy guy, I want to understand whether there are any unintended consequences, but I come into it with an open mind, and I think that I really appreciate the goal, and we need to be as creative as possible in supporting our students. So I'm definitely open to that, and would want to make sure as we navigate the issues that we try to avoid any negative consequences.
So it's been less than 2 months into your new position as chancellor. Give us a sense of what your working relationship is like with UC President Drake and Community College Chancellor Oakley. How often do the three of you meet? What do you talk about?
Thank you. Appreciate the question. We started meeting during the transition. We were invited to different events before I became chancellor. And of course, I was very respectful that I was still speaking as a president of Fresno State. But I've known President Drake for over 20 years. We worked together in Fresno when he was at UCSF, and I was part of the UC Merced founding team to work on some pipeline programs there. And I think very highly of him. And I'm really happy that he's serving in that very important position. So we have a long-standing relationship built on trust. And then with Chancellor Oakley, he actually invited me to serve on his advisory board while I was president at Fresno State, maybe 5-6 years ago. So I had a chance to develop a relationship with him before I was chancellor. And I think that's made our conversations go pretty easily. We had one on Monday and they go so fast. We've been talking about lengthening the time. I think this last one was 45 minutes. And we bring to the meeting different topics that we wish to discuss. And I'll tell you right now, it's been very easy. I'm sure there are going to be topics where it'll be more tense, but I haven't found one yet. So that's good.
Good. Yeah. So we have about 5 minutes until we are going to start the question and answer. And I just want to remind our audience that, send in your questions to ppiceventquestions@gmail.com if you have any. I want to take a moment to get your perspective on California State University's graduation initiative 2025. You mentioned it at the outset in your prayer. Why is it so important? Can you tell us where we are and where you want to go?
Absolutely. Well, for me, it's the most important thing after getting repopulated on the campuses safely, because it's all about ensuring that our talented and diverse students succeed and do so in a timely way. And so I've been a believer in this from the beginning. And as chancellor, I want to make sure we meet those goals in 2025, which are very ambitious at each campus. Graduation rate goals for 4-year and 6-year graduation for new freshmen and for transfer students. And each campus has set a goal along with a system for each of those areas. And then we were challenged to eliminate the equity gaps, Mark. And what I have found is that in general, we are on track to meet our graduation rate goals. But what I'm most fearful of is not meeting the other part, which is to eliminate the equity gaps. Because we could meet the graduation goals without eliminating the gaps. And so that's why I want to accelerate efforts to deal with the equity gaps. And we'll be doing that for the next several years. And then when we get to 2025, my expectation is we'll have met those goals and eliminated those gaps, and then we'll set some even more ambitious goals for the future.
Fantastic. We need to talk about money. We always have to talk about money.
Sure.
And for the Cal State University system, a lot of that is about state support. And you have some very ambitious goals. You've talked about the need to keep college affordable and keep tuition increases where they are. Tell us what you see as the outlook for state support for the California State University system.
Well, thanks to the governor and the legislative leaders and the other members of the legislature, it looks a lot better than it did January 4th. And I'm very thankful for that. They've taken 2 actions since I started as chancellor. The governor announced his January budget, where he announced an increase of about $145 million in new permanent funding. He would say it was at $200 million because about $55 million is going to go to PERS on our behalf. So either way, it's a big plus for us. And then he came out last week with the legislative leaders to say that he was going to restore the $299 million cut. So that's about a plus of $444 million in new permanent funds, if that comes to be, Mark. And that will be so helpful as we work to repopulate the campuses this fall with all the expenses that we're going to have to do that. The federal money will help as well. And of course, that comes with strings. So we've got to, it's like a Rubik's Cube. We got to make sure we use the federal money properly and the state money properly. And then importantly, Mark, the governor also proposed funding for one-time capital and deferred maintenance at about $175 million. I had a meeting yesterday with some of my colleagues and Keely Bossler and Blonde Jose, and what we're asking for, and I know it's bold and ambitious, but we're asking the governor and legislature to fund us at about $740 million in one-time funds, because those would be all of our shovel-ready projects that would really help each of the campuses enhance teaching and learning, and it would help with the recovery, the economic recovery, because it would mean jobs in those communities.
Yeah.
And they were listening. So I'm hoping that we can inspire that kind of level of investment. And if they want to be bolder, we have $3 billion in deferred maintenance. If we wanted to run the table and do all that, we would be ready to do that. And my grandfather taught me to take care of things and fix them early so that they're less expensive later. And that's what I'm trying to do as chancellor, is to get the dollars that we need to enhance our infrastructure and make it more efficient. And that will, of course, connect to GI 2025, because it'll enhance the teaching and learning environment for everybody. So it will help us to achieve those goals as well and eliminate equity gaps.
Sounds like your grandfather taught you some very important things and you listened to them.
Yeah, my grandmother too, and my mother, the three of them. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them.
Great. We have some questions that have come in, and I want to make sure that we get to them. Here's a question from Marcy Masamoto with Masamoto Family Farm, not too far from your old stomping grounds, right?
Best peaches ever.
How can the public best support students enrolled in our public colleges? So this is about how can the public best support students enrolled in our public colleges?
Oh, that's such a great question. Marcy was one of my doctoral students when I was on the faculty at UC Davis and Fresno State, the joint doctoral program. So we go way back. She's an incredible education leader there in Fresno County. I love the question because it really does speak to the fact that we all are in this together. And how can people support education? Of course, as parents, being engaged with their students and what's happening, and asking questions and expressing concerns and making sure that we all are focused on what's best. And I get notes from students and families, and I try to answer those in a timely way. I would say for those who have the means to hire graduates, to mentor, to provide internships, I'd love to see us scale up those opportunities so that as many of those 500,000 students as possible can get that experience. Starting scholarships and other philanthropy, which the Masamotos are known for in Fresno, that's another great way to participate on volunteer boards of all kinds that each of the campuses have, so that their expertise could be shared with us. We really benefit from having that active engagement. And then advocating with us in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., so that the resources that we need, the policies that we need are in place to support the success for all of our students.
Thank you.
Sure.
So here's a question very close to my home, and other times would be my next door neighbor here in our offices at PPIC. Olga Rodriguez, research fellow at PPIC, asked, does the CSU have plans to drop the SAT, ACT for admissions?
I appreciate the question from Olga. I know that we're in discussions about it, and we made the decision to suspend it during the pandemic. And I'll definitely be interested in talking with my colleagues about it. So far as I can tell, things are working fine. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Eric Jeremisian, State Hornet of Sacramento State.
Yeah. Stingers up.
Students have been reporting worsening mental health during the pandemic and during the third virtual semester. How does the CSU plan to help students struggling with their mental health as this pandemic continues? Big question.
Great question. It really is. And we really need to help our CSU heal. So many people that are hurting right now.
Yeah.
The first thing for me is to acknowledge that I completely understand it. I hear about it. I can see it on some of the Zooms that I have with students. Um, the mental health needs of our students are so vitally important. And Mark, and for the questioner, the only bill, there's just one bill that we're sponsoring this year, and that will be has been introduced by Assemblyman Kevin McCarty.
Hmm.
And that bill would call for more student mental health funding to the CSU, the UC, and the community colleges using administrative funds from the Prop 63, right? Prop 63. Make sure I get that number right.
Prop 63, yes.
Yeah, from that administrative fund to go towards student mental health in all of our systems. And then the governor actually proposed additional permanent money in our budget for student mental health and technology access. And that is also, and then additional funds for basic needs issues. So I'm very committed to making sure that we allocate those funds in a way that helps to address the mental health needs of our students, to have more professionals there, more support, more accessible support for them, vitally important.
Such a big issue right now. In our polling, about half of Californians saying that they are experiencing more mental health stress as a result of the pandemic. About a quarter saying that it's serious. Here's a question
Yes.
from one of our audience members. Is the CSU prepared for the DACA population and the updates to guide our students? Is there support at all campuses? And maybe, I mean, I could explain it, but you could probably explain it better. So maybe you want to explain what we're talking about here.
Sure. We're talking about undocumented students or dreamers who came to the U.S. With their families, were born elsewhere, but for all intents and purposes have, gone to school in California and really don't even remember their life before being in California. So the way I'd approach this is there's such an important population for us to serve, and mental health issues are significant for them as well. I think that with our new president in office, President Biden, we have the chance to get a DREAM Act that will, number one, enable us to provide Pell Grants for dreamers. It's very important, and that'll parallel the California DREAM Act, where they're able to get Cal Grants now and treated as residents for tuition purposes. So I very much, that's our number one priority at the federal level, is to get that support for them, and then to get more support for Pell Grants, which will also help on the financial side. But in addition to the financial, there's a need to help our dreamers with all sorts of different issues, legal, or just understanding how to navigate higher education. And so at Fresno State, I created the Dream Center when I was there earlier in my presidency, and each of our campuses has support for dreamers. Okay. And as chancellor, I'm going to support even more efforts in that area. We were getting a lot of philanthropic support for that in Fresno, and that's another way that our community can help, is scholarships that are allow dreamers to get them, because some scholarships don't allow for that, but that's definitely a way to help as well.
Sounds like there is support at all campuses. Here's a question from a viewer in San Francisco. Stockton would be a wonderful location for a 24th CSU. How about a CSU Stockton? And do you have plans for a 24th, 25th, 26th campus? I'll just add to that.
Well, first of all, I love Stockton. I'm a Central Valley guy, and I love Stockton. My view, Mark, is that we should build from the Stockton Center that the CSU Stanislaus has supported and is investing more in. The governor actually included some additional funds to strengthen that program, and that's what I'd like to do. I'm interested in trying to make sure our 23 campuses are strong, and some of them have off-campus centers, and that's great, and I want to help them support those as well. But I don't see in the near future supporting any new campuses.
Thank you. Here's another question from the audience. Given Chancellor Castro's work on equity and access, what role does he see for financial aid for students and families in pursuing their dreams? And what does he think we need to do more what do we need to do to expand aid to more students?
Well, I would definitely like to inspire more investment in financial aid, especially in philanthropy. And to the extent we can, more investment at the federal level with Pell Grants and at the state level with Cal Grants. The more that we can do there, the better for our lower and middle income students, because that will help to accelerate their progress. And I remember for me as first generation, the college student, that financial aid was so very important. I was a Cal Grant B student, and that monthly stipend that I received, that helped me get through every single month. So I totally resonate with that. And I think on all fronts, we want to try to increase investment. Now, having said that, I started with that, but I want folks to know that the CSU is the best value in the country, and our average indebtedness level is far lower than the national average. I think it's like $16,000 or $17,000 for a whole bachelor's degree. So we've been able to keep a lid on costs and add financial aid, and I really want to continue that because I know there are non-direct costs like housing and food and other things that are stressing folks out. So we definitely have to be aggressive on the basic needs front as well.
And I was going to ask you about that. We hear
Yeah.
so much about food insecurity, housing, and what, any thoughts
Yes.
around those issues?
Well, I've been around long enough to remember when I started the program at Fresno State, there were a lot of naysayers about, why are you doing this student cupboard? Why are you giving food to students? Isn't that somebody else's job? You're not the United Way, Joe. And I remember all that. It's much more in the mainstream now. And my view is that we should be aggressive partners. We cannot do this all alone, but we must do our part and do as much as we can. And I'm very happy the state's investing more in these efforts. And I think we can raise more philanthropic dollars to help. We used to get such wonderful produce from farmers all around the valley. And that was such a win for them and a win for our students. They could get healthy food that way. So I think we just need to be aggressive and creative and partner. We're not on our own. We're going to join other organizations to do this, to deal with this need, because if we don't deal with it, then I fear that we will lose a lot of very talented students, and we don't want to do that.
So here's a question from someone at Sacramento State. 4.5 million working age adults in California with some college but no degree, and that number continues to climb during the pandemic. With the additional workforce training that will also be needed, how will the CSU engage and serve this often overlooked population?
I think that's a great question. And our campuses have been focusing energy in this area with degree completion programs that can be done online or in a hybrid format. So I would definitely want folks to know out there that if they began at the CSU and want to complete, they should let us know. And we're going to be more intentional about that as well. But very important point. And some of these folks might actually be the parents of a CSU student. So we can get a couple of graduates out of the family by being thoughtful and creative. And that's great for California.
Thanks. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you a question about your personal story so that our audience has a chance to know about the new chancellor. So your personal story, you were born in the San Joaquin Valley, grandson of immigrants from Mexico, first in your family to graduate from a university. Can you reflect on how your personal story has had a role in how you approach your role as Cal State University Chancellor?
Sure. Well, I explained to you how it felt to be a new student at UC Berkeley. But what I didn't tell you is that I benefited from a program that then Chancellor Michael Heyman had created.
Hmm.
And I went to Fresno with my mother with my paper application and about 100 other students, and listened to a presentation. And I had never been to Berkeley before. Let me tell you, Mark, all I knew was they had a pretty good football team and that they were a famous place, but I had no other information. And I listened carefully. And then after the presentation, they invited us to meet individually with the counselor. So my mother and I sat down, and I gave the counselor my application, and she read through it to make sure it was complete, and it was. And then she stamped admitted right there in person. And that changed my whole life.
Wow.
And so, going from that to have the chance to attend, I still think one of the finest public universities in the world, from a small town to a place, it was even bigger than my hometown. So I had to learn a lot, but that changed my whole life. And as I went through my studies and reflected more on that, I thought, I want to try to help make sure this happens for more students. And that's how I got into higher education policy at the Goldman School, and then studied leadership at Stanford, with John Gardner and Jim March and others. And the focus was really on how do I pay it forward? And I was given this amazing gift. How can I make that possible for more of our talented and diverse students like me? And that's why I'm here.
One way you can do it is by being the chancellor of the California State University system, and that's what you're doing now. So thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to the next opportunity to talk with you, and really appreciate during this very, very busy time that you spent an hour with us today. So thank you so much, Chancellor Castro, and all the best.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I'll see you again soon.
Yes, terrific. So we've reached the end of our program. I'd like to thank again Chancellor Castro, our sponsors, and all of you for joining us today. Next week, we have a very interesting program on March 4th on reopening schools in California. I hope you can join us for that. Later today, you will be receiving a survey about this event. Please fill it out. Thank you again. Please be safe and have a good afternoon.